like the name on the front of the program, Together Again. Thank you for coming to Divine Word College. Please sing along with us in all the hymns and read the responses found in your program. And I hope that you have a wonderful alumni weekend.
As Tim reminded us yesterday, was an incredible year, filled with events that have had a lasting impact on our world, on our nation, on our church, and on our own Society of the Divine Word. This morning, I'd like to look at a few of these events again. Tim mentioned, first off, the Beatles. And this past February, we celebrated, commemorated that amazing time on the Ed Sullivan Show when the Beatles first appeared. And through the year 1964, one Beatles song after the next rose to the top of the charts. In subsequent years, the Beatles would have a profound, transforming effect on music, giving us some of the most memorable songs of the 20th century. I mean, who doesn't know All You Need Is Love? Who doesn't know Hey Jude or Something in the Way She Moves? And then in June, we celebrated and commemorated the passing of the Civil Rights Act, a piece of legislation that, at least legally, put an end to any kind of racial discrimination in our country. Of course, there would be bitter struggles ahead, and we're seeing one of these struggles played out in Ferguson, Missouri in these last days. But the passing of the Civil Rights Act marked a fundamental change in the way attitudes of race, and then eventually attitudes of ethnicity and gender and sexual orientation would be regarded as well. And then in August, the North Vietnamese attacked the American fleet in the Tonkin Gulf. This was an act that resulted in the escalation of the Vietnam War, a war that killed over 50,000 Americans and wounded over 140,000 Americans and caused death and destruction to hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese men, women, and children, and resulted in the exile of hundreds of thousands more. Many of these exiles and refugees, as we know, came to the United States. And as we know, a good number of them have entered the SVD. In October, the Second Vatican Council began its third and perhaps most productive session. Maybe not in terms of the documents that were issued. That was in the last session. But what became clear was that the council had a real commitment to the pastoral turn that was envisioned by John the 23rd and which Paul VI upheld, however shakily at times. The council's landmark document on the church was published in December. The direction for the document on mission, so important to us SVDs, was worked out in that session under the able leadership of Johannes Schutte, who was then the SVD Superior General. And also the basic outlines for the great document on the church in the modern world were worked out. Vatican II, as we all know, was revolutionary, and it's had untold impact on the church and on the SVD in the last 50 years. Of course, not everything went smoothly, and we all know the abuses and the tensions and the problems that the council unleashed on the church and within the SVD. But after Vatican II, nothing was the same. The church had met the modern world, and we're still working out the implications of that encounter today. There were many other events in 1964. President Lyndon Johnson, for instance, declared war on poverty. Nelson Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment in South Africa. Martin Luther King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And on the shores of Lake Hemlock in Canisius, New York, the Hemlock Singers were founded. But there's one other important event in 1964 which brings us here today. And that is the opening in September of 1964 of Divine Word College. It was then called Divine Word Seminary here in Epworth, Iowa. Now, perhaps the opening of Divine Word College has not had the impact internationally or nationally or even in the church that the Beatles or the Civil Rights Act or the Vietnam War or the Second Vatican Council have had. Nevertheless, the opening of Divine Word College has a lot in common with all of these events that continue into our day. And that's because the first administrators and professors at Divine Word College, among them men like Edward Dudick, or John Donaghy, or Pat Barter, or Ed Vargo, Harold Rigney, John Mazinski, they were convinced in opening Divine Word College that a new vision for mission and ministry in today's church was needed. It was certainly not the vision of the Beatles, but it was a vision that said that the men who came out of this college had to be in dialogue with the world that the Beatles were influencing. It certainly was the vision of the Civil Rights Movement and the vision of Vatican II. And while the issues surrounding the Vietnam War were incredibly complex, the founders of Divine Word College wanted to educate men, and again, only men at that time at Divine Word College until recently, educate them to be able to think through the issues clearly and have the courage to act on their convictions. And a decade later, those leaders and the leadership at the time would take the bold step of embracing the refugees that came to this country from Vietnam after 1975. And as Tim said yesterday, the rest is history. Now, it's in this context of the powerful, earth-shaking developments of the last 50 years, and in this context of this celebration of the 50th anniversary of Divine Word College, that we hear God's Word this morning. Our readings speak of the pain of being a prophet, and yet the inescapability of the prophet's call. They speak of living lives so authentically that they can be compared to a sacrificial offering, one born of critical distance from superficial values and committed to the renewal of our ways of thinking. Our readings speak about not holding on to life, but giving it freely away, realizing that the more we hold on greedily and selfishly, the less human we become. And the more we risk and share, the more we're willing to lose. To that extent, we're going to win. In his amazing apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, that was published last November, Pope Francis offers words that seems to me offers a rich and profound commentary on our readings today from Jeremiah and Paul's letter to the Romans and Matthew's Gospel. His words are a quotation from the 2007 Latin American Bishops' Conference in Aparecida, Brazil. And he quoted this way: "Life grows by being given away, and it weakens in isolation and comfort. Indeed, those who enjoy life most are those who leave security on the shore and become excited by the mission of communicating life to others." This is certainly what Jeremiah did. It's certainly what Paul was calling the Christians in Rome to do. And it's definitely what Jesus is talking about. If we're not able to leave security on the shore and set out into the deep, there's no way that we can be the human beings that God has called us to be. To be people who tell the truth at all costs, who witness to it every day of our lives, who are not afraid to be stretched and challenged and to be forgiven. This is what it means to be fully human. This is what it means ultimately to be saved, to achieve salvation. These are the kind of persons who can live fully in our world of innovation, of racial, gender, and sexual equality, of commitment to justice and peace and inclusion of all peoples and nations. You know, as we meet one another these days, almost after 50 years, all of us know that we are much different from the young college students we were 40 or 30 or 20 years ago. Each of us has been carved out of the joys, but also the pains of our lives. Being enticed, like Jeremiah, to do things we wouldn't ordinarily do. Going against the grain of what everyone thinks, having our minds changed over and over again, as Paul exhorts the Romans, and letting go of this cherished idea, this cherished goal, this cherished person, dying to ourselves to give life to others, as Jesus calls us today in the gospel. The kind of men and now women that Divine Word College has worked to form have been men and women who will leave security on the shore and become excited by the mission of communicating life to others. This is what we hope our alma mater will continue to do in the future. And so may all of us grow as we are renewed in our minds, as we die to ourselves, as we leave security on the shore. So may we continue to communicate life to others, as Pope Francis says, so that, in the words of Arnold Jansen, the darkness of sin and the night of unbelief will vanish before the light of the Word and the Spirit of grace, and the heart of Jesus will live in the hearts of all. Amen.
you want.